by 3 years of civil war. 14 tribal factions, each with its own warlord, are fighting for control of the country. These gangs attack aid workers and coalition forces to hijack food supplies, which they sell for weapons.
The warlords were basically just thugs, and they were getting very rich by diverting and controlling all of the foodstuffs and the humanitarian supplies that came in.
Now, based on military intelligence, U.S. Special Forces target 2 lieutenants of a powerful Somali warlord, Mohammed Farah Aidid. Aidid is in hiding, so the plan is to capture and arrest 2 of his top aides to weaken his base. General Thomas Montgomery, the deputy commander of the UN's coalition forces, considers Aidid the worst of the worst.
You get to be the chief if you're the meanest bear in the woods, and this guy was a real thug.
Why is Aidid considered so dangerous? He was behind a deadly attack on UN coalition forces. 4 months earlier, Aidid's men ambushed and massacred 24 Pakistani soldiers. In retaliation, the UN and US attacked a building where they suspected Aidid was hiding. Aidid was not there, but US helicopter gunships destroyed the building, killing several respected elders in Aidid's clan. Afterwards, the U.S. goes a step further and organizes a special task force to get Aidid. Task Force Ranger is made up of Army Rangers, Delta Force operators, and the military's most highly trained helicopter crews, Night Stalkers. Why does the U.S. deploy its most elite forces? To remove Aidid without killing more innocent Somalis. The top appointed official for the UN mission, retired U.S. Navy Admiral Jonathan Howe, lobbied for the deployment of the elite troops.
We need a group that can kidnap somebody without killing a bunch of people. What we wanted were the pros, represented by the U.S. Rangers and Delta, to help us do that.
October 3rd, 3:30 p.m. Task Force Ranger helicopters fly fast and low over the city, deep into Aidid territory. They head toward a well-known 5-story landmark, the Olympic Hotel, one of the tallest buildings in downtown Mogadishu. U.S. intelligence puts Aidid's top 2 aides and dozens of bodyguards inside the target building, across from the hotel. U.S. operations are based at Mogadishu Airport, 3 miles away. Here, officers watch a video feed of the mission as it unfolds. This video, taken by a surveillance helicopter, is the only footage of the operation released by the U.S. government. At the target building, choppers hover close to the ground. The Rangers and Delta Force soldiers quickly unload.
The adrenaline started going. Everybody really got intense about knowing exactly what we were supposed to be doing and getting ready for it.
I was nervous in the sense it's kind of like being on the starting blocks of a race. You run into it in your head, and you just want to make sure that you do everything correctly.
What is the plan for the assault? A snatch and grab operation to take Aidid's men prisoner. Little bird choppers like this one will drop off Delta Force soldiers near the target building. The Rangers will follow in Black Hawk choppers and slide down ropes to the street below, a technique known as fast roping. The plan calls for Delta operators to storm the 3-story target building and take Aidid's men prisoner. Outside, 4 Ranger squads will take up position to secure the perimeter. Simultaneously, a 12-vehicle ground convoy will move to the site to take the soldiers and their prisoners back to headquarters at the Mogadishu airport. The entire mission should take about an hour.
If everything ran smoothly, we would make our attack and be back before dinner.
3:45 p.m. As dozens of Delta Force commandos approach the building, most of the 75-man Ranger team, including Matt Eversman and Michael Goodale, fast rope from the Black Hawk helicopters. the Rangers come under fire immediately.
It seemed like the longest fast rope I'd ever done. And we could hear rounds going by us, which was odd because in previous missions they hadn't actually started shooting at us until later on.
We're in the middle of the street of this four-way intersection, and now I'm realizing now that we're taking fire, from three directions.
Aidid's militia fighters have caught the Rangers off guard. Were Aidid's men tipped off about the raid? Possibly. The Americans may have been double-crossed by Somali informants. The U.S. military relied on information from Somali spies to help them find the lieutenants and track down Aidid. But the informants may have also worked for Aidid.
We discovered later that Aidid's people had their own ways of finding out what was going to happen. They had pretty good intelligence.
Former U.S. ambassador to Somalia, Robert Oakley, also suspects the Somalis may have tipped off Aidid's men through a primitive but effective way of communicating.
They had people who were able to signal using mirrors and smoke and things of this kind, a little bit like the old Indian wars, from one side of the city to the other, whether it was coming on the ground or whether it was coming by helicopters.
Back on the ground, the gunfight rages outside the target building as Delta operators rush in and round up the prisoners. Above, snipers provide cover fire as the Rangers secure positions. This snapshot, taken by an Army Ranger, is the only known photograph from the ground. Rangers and Delta operators can be seen lining the street near the target building, which is above them on the right. At U.S. headquarters, the commander of Task Force Ranger, Major General William Garrison, monitors the video feed, along with Colonel Lee Van Arsdale.
The mission itself on the target went very, very well. 22 armed bodyguards, along with the two principals, taken without being killed within a 20-minute period of time.
4 p.m., the ground convoy arrives. The Delta soldiers start to load the 24 prisoners into the trucks. Everything is going as planned, but a few blocks away, the choppers overhead come under fire. Aidid's militiamen are shooting rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, into the sky. The RPG is a handheld anti-tank weapon with a 100-yard range. The Somalis are firing them at the low-flying helicopters. 4:20 p.m. An RPG explodes into the tail rotor of a Black Hawk, codenamed Super 61. The chopper spins out of control. The pilot radios headquarters. The helicopter crashes into an alley 6 blocks northeast of the Olympic Hotel. A mission that should have lasted only an hour has now taken a disastrous turn, and it's about to get far worse for the American soldiers in Mogadishu. That, along with more questions and answers, when the final report continues. October 3rd, 1993. Mogadishu, Somalia. U.S. military special forces run into trouble during a mission to capture men loyal to warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. Army Rangers are now caught in a fierce street battle with Aidid's militiamen. The Somali fighters, armed with rocket-propelled grenades, have just shot down a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. A rocket-propelled grenade, or RPG, is an anti-tank weapon, not designed to shoot down helicopters. How did the Somalis learn to shoot down helicopters using RPGs? Possibly from members of Al-Qaeda. In 1993, Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda terrorist organization is based in Khartoum, Sudan. According to Jonathan Howe, there is evidence to suggest that Aidid visited Sudan prior to the Battle of Mogadishu.
When Aidid came back, things started to happen that did not go in a good way. And it is our suspicion that what we now call Al-Qaeda fighters not only provided arms, but probably provided some training or help to the Aidid clan.
Bin Laden later claimed his men helped support the Somali fighters. But some, like former U.S. diplomat Walter Clark, suspect bin Laden's Somalia claims are little more than a publicity stunt.
I must say that I think we give him too much credit. I think he wants to sound like he's been involved in every potential defeat the U.S. has been involved in.
Back on the ground, RPG fire has brought down a Black Hawk helicopter. Commanders at U.S. headquarters order everyone to the crash site.
Now the mission had changed. It was no longer a raid on a building. Now it was we have to go secure a crash site because we got comrades that are in trouble.
But armed Somalis also rushed to the downed Black Hawk.
You could see the Somalis moving down the side streets parallel to us. Everybody was racing to that crash.
As the U.S. soldiers rush to the site, they come under a relentless barrage of RPG fire.
It just seemed like every time you turn around, there would be a volley of RPG fire. I had never experienced anything as loud in my life. So loud that it literally makes your teeth hurt.
Adding to the chaos, the men are assaulted with small arms fire from every direction.
It was hard to tell where the fire was coming from because it was coming from all different directions.
The whole city seemed to be abuzz with fighting. You know, everywhere we stopped, every street corner, soldiers were engaging the enemy.
Just to give people an idea of how intense it got, my lieutenant said that his platoon went from 17 down to 3 inside of about 5 minutes, with people being wounded.
The intensity of this battle is something American soldiers never anticipated. Why are the Somali fighters so relentless in their attacks? They are not afraid to die and consider it dishonorable to run from battle. Years of fighting have toughened the Somalis, but some say their aggressive nature is also fueled by an amphetamine-like stimulant, a bitter green plant called khat. General Thomas Montgomery says use of the drug added to the battle's intensity.
It sort of heightened their natural tendencies to be aggressive.
Militia fighters begin their day by chewing khat. As the day goes on, they grow increasingly agitated and jumpy.
After 3 or 4 hours, then you're getting very, very high and aggressive and worked up.
The drug-induced high typically peaks by mid-afternoon. That's exactly when the U.S. soldiers enter the city. Shortly after the Black Hawk is shot down, the first ground troops arrive at the wreckage and secure the perimeter. A Little Bird helicopter is able to airlift a pair of survivors to safety. After the Little Bird takes off, a medical rescue team fast ropes in from another chopper and begins to help the remaining 6 soldiers involved in the crash. The pilot and co-pilot are dead. The body of the pilot is wedged inside the wreckage. Getting the body out will take time. 4:40 p.m., 20 minutes after the first helicopter went down, a Somali fires an RPG toward another Black Hawk helicopter. This one, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant. The RPG makes a direct hit, knocking off a section of the Black Hawk's tail rotor. It spins out of control. The second chopper crashes about 7 blocks southeast of the Olympic Hotel, directly south of the first crash site. Ground forces are still on the move toward the site of the first crash. But now that a second Black Hawk has gone down, is there a contingency plan for a second crash? Yes, but only a plan with limited resources.
We had the combat search and rescue plane and we had a backup plane, but you can only do so many backups before it gets too redundant. You have too many people and too many things on the ground.
The soldiers on the ground continue to the first crash site as ordered. But getting there isn't easy.
Four-way intersections are really nasty because you can get shot at from all four directions, and we were getting ready to cross that intersection. And that's when I got hit. I remember my leg just seizing up.
Goodale is shot in the right thigh. Delta commandos soon rescue him.
Those guys are your Jedi Knights. You're just glad we have them on our side.
Delta soldiers commandeer a nearby home as shelter for Goodale and other wounded soldiers.
One of the Delta guys says, we're going in there, and kicked in a door and went through the building and said, bring everybody in here.
The convoy carrying soldiers and prisoners is also trying to make it to the first crash site. They're getting directions from chopper pilots above, but are having trouble.
Take the next right, the next right. Roger, next right, next right. Alleyway, alleyway. Turn right.
The military vehicles drive in circles.
Yes, mister, turn. Roger, take the next available right.
The convoy is forced to make numerous course corrections.
We just kept going through almost the same ambush. You know, I mean, it was so frustrating.
Why can't the convoy get to the crash site? The answer to that question and the race to rescue the soldiers, next on the final report. October 3rd, 1993. Mogadishu, Somalia. A U.S. military assault that should have lasted only an hour has spiraled out of control. During a raid against forces loyal to warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid, Somali shot down 2 American Black Hawk helicopters. Rescue efforts are underway, but a convoy of military vehicles heading to the first down chopper is having trouble. Why can't the convoy get to the crash site? It faces road obstacles and delayed communications from the helicopter crews above. Part of the problem is that some directions come from spy planes flying overhead, but this takes time. Their instructions are relayed through military headquarters at the Mogadishu airport, then to the chopper crews, who in turn communicate with the convoy.
By the time this guy's telling him, okay, take a right-hand turn here, they've driven by it.
All this undertaking heavy automatic fire and RPG fire. Noise is deafening, and you're watching people get shot around you. It's a confused, very volatile situation, to say the least.
The soldiers also face obstructions at every turn. Ranger Matt Eversman was in the convoy.
Not all the streets are wide enough for the vehicles, and, you know, that just compounds this, you know, already delicate situation.
Even when the vehicles do get through, they come up against more problems. This video from the battle shows Somalis building roadblocks made up of old tires, which they set ablaze. The soldiers at the crash site are under heavy attack. At 5:40 p.m. More than an hour after the first Black Hawk went down, and after many course corrections, the convoy approaches the wreckage. But the street battle has taken a heavy toll. There are now too many dead and wounded in the convoy to retrieve any additional soldiers at this point. It cannot stop to help. The convoy has no choice but to return to headquarters.
We lost several vehicles of our convoys, many wounded. We wouldn't have had space for casualties anyway. So the thought, I think, was drop off our vehicles at the airfield, refit, regroup, reorganize, and then head back out.
The soldiers at the first crash site must stay put. In all, there are nearly 100 men. They are in groups, some close to the wreckage, others in nearby buildings. The soldiers wait for help and protect the fallen crew.
Part of the Ranger Creed is, I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy.
Just no question about it. I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. Just the way it is. There's no second guessing it. You know, even if you're dead or alive, we're going to bring you back.
While the soldiers hold their positions, military commanders dispatch another convoy to the site of the second Black Hawk crash. But those vehicles also come under heavy fire and roadblocks. They can't make it to the site and are forced to turn back. At the same time, a helicopter drops 2 snipers near the wreckage of the second crash. From overhead, 3 crew members appear alive. The snipers move to the Black Hawk and take up defensive positions. Suddenly, Somalis swarm the chopper. They shoot and kill the snipers and 3 crew members and drag away their bodies. The Black Hawk pilot, Mike Durant, is captured alive. At military headquarters, commanders watch the live video feed as the Somalis overrun the site.
Here we were watching it, and we were helpless. We couldn't do anything about it.
6 p.m. The soldiers staked out at the first crash site, Radio Military Headquarters. Headquarters replies that help is on the way. Commanders Major General William Garrison and General Thomas Montgomery turn to UN coalition forces for aid. Montgomery organizes a rescue force, a 100-vehicle convoy, including Pakistani and Malaysian tanks and armored personnel carriers. The force also includes men from the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division.
Putting all that force together, it wasn't easy, but they were ready to come to our aid. We were all, brothers in arms in that coalition.
But it takes hours to pull together the rescue convoy. It finally heads into the streets of Mogadishu after 11 p.m. This convoy comes under heavy fire as well. For the next 3 hours, the soldiers battle their way to the crash site, 3 miles away.
They had a hell of a battle getting in there to reach the Rangers who were pinned down.
Sergeant Kenny Thomas and his fellow Rangers are positioned near the wreckage of the first helicopter crash. They can hear the battle as the convoy approaches.
You could hear them coming all night because you could hear the across the city as they were shooting, fighting their way in.
There's a point at which you really start to wonder, is this the spot that I'm supposed to die in?
Monday, October 4th. Finally, before 2 a.m., the rescue convoy arrives at the first crash site.
It was great to see them when they got there in the morning. They came, and I thank them for it.
The wounded and dead are loaded into the vehicles. Inside an armored personnel carrier, injured Sergeant Michael Goodale feels like a sitting duck.
I honestly believed that an RPG was going to come through the side of that thing, or the front of it or something, and it was just going to wipe us all out.
The convoy is finally ready to leave 4 hours later. Why does it take so long for the rescue convoy to head back? It takes hours to extract the body of the pilot from the helicopter. His body is wedged inside the Black Hawk wreckage. Soldiers first use a saw to cut through the metal, but the chopper is reinforced with bulletproof materials, making it difficult to cut through the wreckage.
Those Blackhawks are pretty well made. We weren't able to cut it out, so that's when we got the Humvee in there, hooked up a tow rope, and started pulling it apart.
By the time the pilot's body is finally removed, the sun is coming up. 5:45 a.m. The convoy is ready to move. But there's another problem. The number of wounded is more than anyone expected. There simply isn't enough room for everyone. Now, after surviving a 14-hour street battle, some of the soldiers must make a run for it, back through those same streets. Then, in the aftermath of the battle, brutal images horrify and enrage the American public. When the final report continues. October 4th, 1993. Mogadishu, Somalia. 5:45 a.m. 2 U.S. Black Hawk helicopters are down. All the American soldiers at the first crash site are accounted for, including a dead pilot. But there isn't enough room in the rescue convoy for everyone. Now, 14 hours after the battle began, almost 36 exhausted soldiers are forced to run alongside the convoy.
It was a good thing that we were in shape because our bodies were really tired, but your mind was saying you gotta go.
After about a mile-long run through the city, the soldiers are picked up by another small convoy and driven to safety.
We're getting shot at. It's amazing we didn't lose anybody on that run out of the city.
6:30 a.m. The rescue convoy enters a soccer stadium where a field hospital has been set up. Bullet-riddled military vehicles carry the wounded and dead. For those who survived the Battle of Mogadishu, this is the first time they can reflect on what they've been through.
Once you knew you were safe and your guard was let down, everything went. And I just started crying.
It was very strange coming out of vehicles and then kind of peeling ourselves out of the vehicles themselves, and stretcher bearers all around. So much had happened since the day before.
The battle has killed 18 U.S. soldiers and wounded 84 more. Various estimates place Somali casualties between 500 and 1,500. And the chaos is not yet over. By late morning, pictures from the battle's aftermath are broadcast around the world. Some of the images are horrifying. Somalis took the bodies of the American soldiers from the second helicopter crash and dragged them through the streets of Mogadishu.
I can't describe for you the anger and the frustration that I and others felt when we saw the way they were being treated. I mean, you want to strike. You want to get them.
Just disgust that people could do that. I mean, just barbarism.
The extent of the Somali anger is shocking. The pictures display a deep hatred of America. Why are the Somalis so angry with the U.S.? They are deeply resentful of recent U.S. military actions. In the summer before the Battle of Mogadishu, the U.S., as part of the UN coalition, waged an aggressive campaign to capture the warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. The forces attacked suspected arms dumps and raided Aidid's strongholds. These operations enraged the Somalis because innocent people were killed.
He is the president of America. He ordered to bomb our country, our people.
A failed attack on Aidid that killed several respected elders produced the most resentment.
It drew a lot of sympathy from the Somalis that maybe wasn't there towards Aidid's clan.
Aidid became sort of the martyr in a sense, and became much more of a hero than he had been in the past.
A hero who was also a shrewd propagandist. Aidid whipped up anti-American sentiment.
They were pretty good at propaganda, and they put out a lot of it on the radio stations and newspapers, that we were basically robbing of the riches, that the United Nations was here just to exploit the people.
In the Battle of Mogadishu, everyone, it seemed, jumped into the fight. Somali citizens joined the Aidid militiamen in battling U.S. forces. And after years of civil war, the Somali citizens were armed to the teeth.
There's everything. All the weapons came out of the huts, the cellars. Everybody came to join the fight.
The U.S. did not think the Somalis could inflict much harm on American forces.
It was the Captain Kirk's of Army Aviation. No one's going to bring down the Enterprise with a little stupid pea shooter. And yet, they were able to do that. They had a lot more weapons than we knew.
We found that simply because they weren't sophisticated in terms of weaponry didn't mean they didn't know how to fight, and they were prepared to fight.
During the battle, forces loyal to Aidid captured Black Hawk helicopter pilot Mike Durant. His captors force him to make this videotape.
You're killing people innocent. Innocent people being killed is not good.
This image of a bloody and battered American soldier is also broadcast around the world. Then, after 11 days in captivity, Durant is released. How did the U.S. win Durant's freedom? By threatening overwhelming military action. Robert Oakley, former ambassador to Somalia, negotiated with Aidid's men to release the Black Hawk pilot.
I said, sooner or later, we'll try to rescue him. Probably that'll lead to a fight. If that happens, there's so much pent-up anger in the United States that I think we'll probably just demolish this whole part of Mogadishu.
Back in the States, many wonder how the situation in Somalia got so out of control. Members of Congress call for an immediate withdrawal.
Seems to me that enough Americans have died in Somalia.
Downed airmen paraded through the streets of Mogadishu while their tormentors kicked them and chant anti-American slogans. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough.
Today, I want to talk with you about our nation's military involvement.
President Clinton counters the congressional demands.
Recently, General Colin Powell said this about our choices in Somalia. Because things get difficult, you don't cut and run.
Still, the question before Congress remains. Is the U.S. mission in Somalia worth sacrificing the lives of more American soldiers? The answer to that question and more in the conclusion of the final report. The Battle of Mogadishu in October of 1993 turned into the worst firefight for American forces since the Vietnam War. After the battle, at the U.S. military headquarters in Mogadishu, soldiers put up a makeshift memorial. Boots, rifles, and headgear stand as a poignant reminder of the soldiers who gave their lives in battle. The bodies of all 18 U.S. soldiers are eventually recovered. Back at home, public shock and grief turns into anger. People want to know, how did a humanitarian mission turn into a deadly military operation? Over time, the focus of the mission changed. In December 1992, when President George H.W. Bush first announced the plan, he said the goal was to help starving people. U.S. government reports estimated that without help, the famine could kill up to 1.5 million Somalis. The president deployed 25,000 U.S. soldiers and promised the troops wouldn't stay for long.
Our mission has a limited objective: to open the supply routes, to get the food moving, and to prepare the way for a UN peacekeeping force to keep it moving.
We are here to help these people, not to hurt them.
The objective was to provide a certain amount of stability so that a UN force could then come in and deal with a long-term plan of rebuilding Somalia.
I, William Jefferson Clinton.
When President Bill Clinton took office, the withdrawal of U.S. military forces was beginning. But in May of 1993, with the humanitarian mission moving smoothly, the United Nations changed course. It authorized a new military operation to restore law and order and establish a new government in Somalia.
The United Nations Security Council decided that not only do we need to feed the starving, but we need to put this nation back together. So this was a major change in the mission function.
While the Clinton administration did support this new mission, the president continued to withdraw U.S. forces. By the end of June, only 4,200 U.S. troops remained in Somalia. General Thomas Montgomery, deputy commander of the UN forces, saw a daunting task ahead.
Our mission is, all of a sudden, to disarm the Somalis, to finish the humanitarian relief, and then to rebuild all the governmental institutions. So the mandate was not a realistic mandate.
one person standing in the way of that mandate was the ruthless warlord, Mohammed Farah Aidid. In June 1993, after Aidid's men massacred 24 Pakistani soldiers, the UN envoy to Somalia, Jonathan Howe, made the first of several requests. He specifically asked for U.S. Special Forces to capture Aidid.
Aidid really was not in deep hiding at that point. He was quite openly around. We even had some opportunities with our regular forces to capture him, but we didn't. What we wanted were the pros, represented by the U.S. Rangers and Delta, to help us do that.
August 1993. President Clinton approved the deployment of Task Force Ranger. Throughout the summer, Aidid's men increased the number of ambushes against UN forces. By September, it became clear to General Montgomery that he needed more resources to bring down the warlord. He requested 4 Abrams tanks and 14 Bradley fighting vehicles. Defense Secretary Les Aspin denied the request. Some say Aspin believed sending heavy armaments to Somalia would be perceived as a new buildup, which would cause a political backlash. 1 month later, in October, the deadly Black Hawk battle occurs. In the debate that follows, the question persists. Is the U.S. mission in Somalia worth sacrificing the lives of more American soldiers? Congress and President Clinton agree it's not worth the risk. After the horrific images from Somalia are broadcast around the world, President Clinton comes under intense political pressure, particularly from the Republican opposition, to pull out. Just 3 days after the battle, he assures Americans that U.S. troops would soon be returning home.
Our mission from this day forward is to increase our strength, do our job, bring our soldiers out, and bring them home.
13 years later, in 2006, the former president would point out that he did resist pressure from Republicans who wanted to withdraw immediately.
They were all trying to get me to withdraw from Somalia in 1993, the next day after we were involved in Black Hawk Down, and I refused to do it and stayed 6 months and had an orderly transfer to the United Nations.
One consequence of the American withdrawal, Aidid was never captured. Many soldiers were unhappy with the decision to give up the hunt.
We should have gone in there and finished the mission that we started.
I did want to go back. We still hadn't finished our original mission, which was to capture Aidid.
I think there was tremendous frustration. There was certainly a lot of anger. All the more reason for us to stay and capture this guy.
In the final report on Black Hawk Down, the fallout was both immediate and far-reaching. Right after the battle, in a letter to the president, Major General William Garrison, the commander of Task Force Ranger, accepted full responsibility for the outcome. But a Senate report focused blame upon President Clinton's foreign policy, and particularly on Defense Secretary Les Aspin, stating that even though U.S. policy in Somalia was to reduce its military presence, the Secretary of Defense should have given more consideration to the request from his military commanders and approved the request for armor. The Senate report agreed with General Montgomery that heavy armor could have been used decisively and might have saved lives.
If I'd have had 5 tanks on the ground or 4 tanks, I would have been able to bust right into those Rangers who were surrounded and held down. If I'd had them, they would have made a big difference in our ability to rapidly get to them.
On December 16th, 2 months after Black Hawk Down, Les Aspin resigned as Defense Secretary. But the most profound fallout from the Battle of Mogadishu was its effect on foreign policy. After Somalia, the Clinton administration was reluctant to put more American soldiers in harm's way.
One of the major policies of the Clinton administration was to take no casualties. This carried over into Rwanda, Haiti, Bosnia, and Kosovo because of great political fear here at home of having more Americans killed.
Nobody wants to talk about Somalia, but the lingering effects of Somalia are around today. That's why we're doing this interview, because the lessons are still relevant today.
According to Montgomery and many others who were in Somalia, an important lesson came from the decision to withdraw.
The decision to withdraw, which came just days after Black Hawk Down, looking back at it, that was not a good signal to send.
Osama bin Laden used the U.S. withdrawal to his advantage. In a 1998 interview, he referred to the U.S. and Somalia as a paper tiger, saying, after a few blows, it ran in defeat. In other words, the only superpower in the world could be beaten because it was not willing to tolerate casualties. In 1995, the UN mission in Somalia officially ended. The final withdrawal of all coalition forces led to anarchy. The following year, the warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid died of wounds from a battle with rival clan forces. Anarchy continued into the next century, and the people of Somalia kept suffering. In 2004, the United Nations supported a new government made up of leaders from Somalia's clans, but it struggled. In June 2006, Islamic extremists took control of Mogadishu as part of a new government called the Council of Islamic Courts. But Al-Qaeda's support of the council prompted fears that Somalia would create a safe haven for terrorists.
The question is Somalia going to become another Afghanistan where you'll have a haven for the Talibans and the Al-Qaedas and the Hezbollahs of the world? That's what we have to be concerned about.
In December 2006, the UN-supported Somali government forces, with help from Ethiopia, took back control of Mogadishu. But the city remains one of the world's most dangerous, a place where the US and its allies learned the hard way about the risks of nation building.
Nobody knew very much about Somalia. The idea was that this wasn't a dangerous mission. Looking back, it's hard to believe that we were that naive, but we were that naive.
It's always with you, and it always will be. It was such an impact, and it changed me forever.
I saw people doing things well beyond their job. They could be defined as heroic by the sheer definition of the word. It's a privilege to tell stories about those guys because they represent the finest that this country has to offer. All of them. Everybody I was with that day.
As America continues to deploy its finest around the globe, the firefight in Mogadishu remains a painful reminder of how quickly missions can go bad. And in today's dangerous world, the perception that America can sometimes be defeated may have lasting and powerful consequences.